The bell rang twice. Adam looked up from the bench. The loop slipped from his eye and swung against his chest on its fine chain. He had been adjusting a balance wheel on a pocket watch from before the war, a job that wanted patience and a steady wrist. And now there were footsteps in the front room, 3 sets, soft on the old floorboards. He pushed back the stool, wiped his hands on the leather apron. The tweezers went into the breast pocket beside the small screwdriver he kept there out of habit. His father had kept his there too. Adam slid the magnifier into its tray, closed the drawer of tiny brass screws, and stepped through the curtain that divided the workshop from the shop. The first one through the door wore deep green velvet. She was small, no taller than his shoulder, and stood at the counter with her gloves folded over one wrist. Her skin was dark green, smooth as the lacquered case of an old long-case clock, and her eyes were the color of emerald glass held against a lamp. 2 tusks, small, neat. Her hair was gathered at the nape with mother-of-pearl pins. Behind her stood a second, taller by an inch, with red-tipped curls and a portfolio under her arm, and a third, a child, in a Navy school skirt and a Peter Pan collar with a satchel pressed against her thigh. "Good afternoon," the first one said. Her voice was low and even, the kind of voice that did not expect to be interrupted. "Are you Mr. Quill?" "Adam, yes." "My name is Inda." She placed a small velvet box on the counter. The box was older than she was. He recognized the silk lining when she opened it, the discreet stamp of a maker from up north who had stopped working in his grandfather's time. Inside, on a bed of gray velvet, lay a wristwatch on a thin gold strap. The case was rose gold, the dial cream, the numerals not numerals but tiny etched symbols that he half recognized and could not place. The crown was missing the small cap. The second hand sat at rest at the quarter past. "3 watchmakers have refused," Inda said. "You were recommended. Can you fix this?" Adam picked it up. The weight of it was wrong for its size, heavier, denser. He turned it over. The caseback was etched with the same pattern that wrapped the dial, and the etching went all the way through to the inner workings. He could see it through the small inspection window at the back. He had only seen that pattern in one place in his life, and it was in a book on the shelf above his bench, and the book had belonged to his father. His hands shook. Not much. A tremor at the wrist, brief. The kind of tremor that came when he held something that was not his and weighed more than he had expected. He set the watch down on the velvet before it became obvious. "I don't know," he said. He heard his own voice quieter than he had meant. "But I'll try." Inda did not blink. For half a second, less than that, something passed behind her face. A thing that might have been relief, might have been the breath she had not let go since walking in. Then she nodded, and the moment was over, and the velvet box was closed and pushed 2 inches toward him across the counter. "How long?" she said. He thought about saying a week, the way his father would have said a week to settle a customer. He thought about saying he would call her. He looked at the watch in the box, and he thought of the book on the shelf, and the symbols he had seen there once, 10 years ago, when his father was still standing at this counter, wearing this same apron. "I don't know that either." She nodded again. From an inner pocket of the velvet jacket, she withdrew a small white card and laid it on the counter beside the box. An address, written by hand. No telephone. The second one, the one with the red in her hair, had drifted to the back wall while they spoke. She was looking at the wall of clocks, 23 of them, all ticking slightly out of sync, the way his father had liked. She turned. "The one in the walnut case," she said. "The one with the moon dial. Is that 19th century?" 1872, Adam said. "It's beautiful." The child had not moved from her sister's side. She was looking at the loop on its chain against Adam's chest. She did not reach for it. She did not say anything. She only looked, the way some children looked at things they had decided to remember. Inda drew on her gloves, one finger at a time. "I will come back in 4 days," she said. "If you have learned anything by then, you may tell me. If you have not, you may tell me that also." The bell rang twice again as the door closed behind them. Adam stood at the counter for a long time. The velvet box sat where she had left it. Outside the window, the first thin snow had begun to settle on the cobblestones, and somewhere in the back room, behind the curtain, the wall of clocks went on ticking, slightly out of sync, each one a second behind or a second ahead of the others. He picked up the box. It was lighter than it had felt before. He carried it through the curtain into the workshop, and on the bench, under the single yellow lamp, he opened it again. And in the lamplight, the etched symbols on the dial caught and held the light in a way that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Because he had seen that catch of light once before, in his father's hands, and his father had never told him whose watch it was. The shop closed at 6. Adam turned the sign on the door and slid the bolt. Outside, the snow had thickened into a steady fall, and the cobblestones beyond the window had gone soft and white under the street lamp. He drew the curtain across the front room. The wall of clocks ticked on behind him, each at its own pace, the sound he had grown up to and stopped hearing the way other people stopped hearing the sea. He carried the velvet box back through to the bench, sat down, switched on the jeweler's lamp. The light pooled small and yellow on the green felt mat. He took the watch out, laid it on the mat, and slid the loop down over his right eye. The first thing he did was nothing. He looked. His father had told him that once, a long time ago, when Adam was still a boy who wanted to take everything apart at once, sit with it first. Look at it as it is before you decide what it is. So he sat. He looked. He let the watch be a watch on a piece of green felt under a yellow lamp for a full 10 minutes before he touched a single tool. The case was rose gold, low carat by the color, hand-finished. The etching on the dial was not pattern, but writing of a kind. Small repeating glyphs running in a ring around the inside of the bezel, and then again, smaller, around the center post. He had seen those glyphs only in one of his father's older reference volumes, a thick brown book with a cracked spine, and he had been told as a boy not to take that book down from the shelf until he was ready. He had never been told when ready would arrive. He turned the watch over with the soft brass tweezers. The case back was held by 4 tiny screws, each no bigger than a grain of rice. He fetched the smallest screwdriver from the apron pocket, the one with the blue handle his father had wrapped in waxed thread in the year Adam was born, and he removed the screws one at a time, laying them in a shallow porcelain dish so that none would roll. The back came away. He set it aside on the felt. The movement underneath was not like any movement he had taken apart. The mainspring barrel sat off-center. The escape wheel had 13 teeth, not 15. The palette fork was longer than it should have been, by perhaps half a millimeter, and the balance wheel was finished in a blued steel he had only ever seen in pictures. He sat back on the stool. the loop pressed against the bridge of his nose. He realized he had been holding his breath and let it out slowly through his teeth. "Older than I thought," he said, to no one. The room did not answer. A clock somewhere in the front room struck the quarter. Then a second clock struck it a half-second later. Then a third caught up. The sound was familiar, and he did not turn his head. He worked for another hour without touching anything, just looking. Drawing the mechanism, badly, in pencil on a sheet of graph paper. Numbering the pieces he could identify, leaving question marks beside the ones he could not. There were 6 question marks by the time he stopped. The cup of tea he had made at 6:30 had gone cold on the corner of the bench, and a thin film had formed on the surface that broke when he pushed it aside with his knuckle. At 9:30 he stood up. His back was stiff. He climbed the spiral staircase to the apartment above the shop, made another cup of tea, brought it down, and crossed to the shelf above the bench. The brown reference volume sat between a book on French marine chronometers and a slim gray pamphlet on Swiss jeweled bearings. Adam reached up, took it down. The dust was thin. His father had handled this one often in the last years. He set the book on the bench beside the watch and opened it. The pages were thick, the print small, the diagrams hand-drawn and then reproduced. The glyphs from Inda's dial were in the book. Not all of them. Some of them. The book called them Maker's Marks of a Workshop in the Far North, 4 valleys over from anywhere a city watchmaker had reason to know. The workshop, the book said, had been in operation for 11 generations and had closed in the year 1904, and the last apprentice had moved south and trained no one. After that, the book said, the watches still circulated, but no one knew how they had been made. Adam read the paragraph 3 times. He read it a 4th time, aloud, quietly, because his father had told him once that if you wanted to remember a thing, you should say it where you could hear yourself say it. The clock in the front room struck 10. He pulled the book closer. There were diagrams further on, 2 of them, of a mechanism that resembled the one open on his bench. The proportions were close, not exact. He laid the book flat with a small brass weight and bent over the watch again. The loop came back down over his eye. At 11 the tea had gone cold a second time. At midnight he went upstairs for bread and butter and came back down with the plate in his hand and ate at the bench, slowly, between turns of a page. At 1 in the morning he found the entry that named the watch he was looking at, or named one like it, and there was a footnote in tiny print that said only, 6 known to survive, all in private hands. He sat back. His shoulders ached. His eyes, when he took the loop off, hurt at the edges. He looked at the velvet box, empty now on the corner of the felt. He looked at the watch, half open, exposed on the green mat, all its tiny pieces still in their proper places, like a body that had stopped sleeping but not yet woken. 3 watchmakers, he thought. 3 watchmakers had said no. And he could see now, in the way the palette fork was cut, and the way the balance wheel was finished, and the way the glyphs ran around the bezel like a language no one alive could read straight through, why 3 watchmakers had said no. And he could see also why his hands had shaken at the counter when he had first picked the thing up. He did not put the case back on. He did not put the watch away. He left it open on the felt under the lamp, the small porcelain dish of screws beside it, and he turned the lamp down to its lowest setting so that the metal would not catch the heat through the long night. It was 3 in the morning when he climbed the stairs. He did not undress. He sat on the edge of the bed with the brown book in his lap and the page open at the entry he had read 4 times now, and he stared at the wall. Somewhere in the book, he was almost sure, there had been a note in the margin. Not a printed note, a pencil note, in a hand he would have known anywhere. He had seen it without seeing it on one of the earlier pages, near the back of the chapter on northern workshops. He could not now remember which page. He sat with the book in his lap, and the snow falling outside the window, and the cold of the floorboards rising through the soles of his shoes, and he understood that he was not going to sleep until he found that note again. He went back down the stairs barefoot. The bench lamp was still on. He sat down, pulled the book toward him, and began to turn the pages, one at a time, looking for a margin in his father's handwriting that he was certain he had glimpsed and then passed over. The clocks in the front room struck the half-hour. The watch on the felt did not strike anything. It only lay there, open, waiting, the rose gold of its case catching the last small warmth of the lamp. He did not find it that night. Adam closed the book at 5 in the morning. His eyes hurt past the point of seeing. He climbed the stairs again, lay down without undressing, and slept 4 hours that felt like 1. When he came back down, the snow had stopped, and the light through the front window was the color of weak tea. The watch was where he had left it. The book was where he had left it. He had not dreamt of either, which surprised him. He opened the shop at 10 because he could not bring himself to leave it shut. 2 customers came in before noon, a man collecting a repaired pocket watch, a woman dropping off a mantel clock that had begun to chime at 1/4 every hour and refused to chime on the hour itself. Adam took the clock, wrote the ticket, and put the woman's name in the ledger in the same hand his father had used for 30 years. He smiled at the right places. He said the right things. The whole time, somewhere behind his ribs, a small, steady pressure stayed with him. The pressure of a margin note he had glimpsed and could not find again. At 1 in the afternoon, he turned the sign and locked the door. He climbed to the attic by the narrow stair behind the apartment landing. He had not been up there in 7 months. The cold pressed through the wool of his vest at the 3rd step. The attic ran the length of the building, low rafters, a single dormer with a window painted shut, a bare bulb on a chain. Along one wall stood his father's old archive, 11 wooden filing boxes stacked 3 high, each labeled in pencil with a span of years. The earliest box read 1968 to 1971. The latest read 2021 to 2023. His father had died in the spring of 2023. The last box was thinner than the others. Adam pulled the chain. The bulb came on yellow. He sat down on an upturned crate. The book had been printed in 1946. His father had owned it from his apprenticeship, which had begun in 1981. If there was a margin note, it had been written somewhere in the 40 years after that. He did not know which year. He did not know which client. He had only the watch on the bench downstairs and a memory of glyphs that ran in a ring around a cream dial. He started with the oldest box. He worked the way he worked at the bench, slow, 1 folder at a time. He read the heading on each, set it aside if it concerned a wall clock or a marine chronometer, kept it if it concerned a wristwatch. He went through 1968 to 71 in 40 minutes. Nothing. 1972 to 74 in 30. Nothing. By the time he reached the 3rd box, his fingers had gone numb, and he had to stop and rub them against the inside of the leather apron, which he had forgotten to take off before climbing the stairs. He found it in the 4th box. The folder was labeled simply Velen, November 1994. He almost passed over it. His father had used surnames most often, and the name meant nothing to him. He opened it because the folder was thicker than the ones around it. Inside, 3 pages of yellow carbon paper, copies of letters his father had sent. Adam slid the loop down out of habit, then pushed it back up. The writing was large enough to read without it. The first letter was a quote for the cleaning of a long case clock. The second was a follow-up. The third letter was 4 pages long and addressed to a Madame Velan at an address he did not recognize. He began to read. His father had written in the careful round hand he had used for clients. The wristwatch you have brought me is of a make I have not handled before, though I have read of the workshop in the brown volume I keep above the bench. The mechanism is older than the case suggests. The escape wheel has 13 teeth where the standard is 15. The pallet fork is cut long by what I judge to be 0.5 millimeter. The dial bears the workshop's glyphs around the bezel and again smaller around the center. Adam stopped reading. He read the paragraph again. He read it a third time. The paper was thin under his thumb. The cold of the attic had begun to settle in his ankles, and he did not feel it. His father had repaired one 30 years ago, a watch like Inda's. Adam sat on the crate with the page held flat against his knee, and he understood, slowly, the way understanding came when you were too tired to argue with it, that he was not the first person in this room to have seen what he was looking at downstairs. He kept reading. His father had written the letter 4 pages because his father had been honest with the client about everything, that he was not certain, that he would need to fabricate a small component himself, that the work would take time, that he could not promise. I will tell you what I know and what I do not know as I go, his father had written near the bottom of the 3rd page. I will not promise you a repair I cannot deliver. I will promise you only that I will not stop. Adam read that line aloud, into the cold air of the attic, the way he had read the brown book aloud the night before. His voice came out rougher than he expected. The 4th page was technical. His father had drawn, in pencil, a small sketch of the component he had made, proportions noted in millimeters along the side, the angle of one cut indicated with a tiny arrow, a note beneath that read, "File by hand. Do not use the lathe for the final pass." Adam stared at the sketch. He could feel his pulse in his thumbs. He turned the page over. The back was blank. He fanned through the rest of the folder. A receipt for the work, dated February 1995, 3 months after the first letter. A short note from Madame Velan, 2 lines, thanking his father in a thin, slanted hand. Nothing else. He carried the folder downstairs. He laid it on the bench beside the watch and the brown book and the cold cup of tea from the night before. He sat down on the stool. The yellow lamp was still on at its lowest setting. He turned it up. He read his father's letter a second time at the bench, then a third. He did not realize he was crying until a drop landed on the carbon paper, and he had to lift the page quickly so it would not spread on the ink. He wiped his face with the back of his wrist. He felt foolish. He felt also less alone in the room than he had felt in 2 years. He opened the brown book to the chapter on northern workshops. He went through it page by page now, slowly, with the folder open beside him. On page 217, in the margin beside a printed diagram of a 13-tooth escape wheel, he found it. The note he had glimpsed the night before. 3 words in his father's hand, in soft pencil that had faded toward gray. File by hand. Adam looked at the words for a long time. He looked up at the photograph on the wall above the bench, his father in this same apron, at this same workbench, in a year before Adam was old enough to remember. He looked at the photograph the way you looked at a person across a table. He did not say anything. He did not need to. He picked up his pencil. He began to copy the sketch from the letter onto a fresh sheet of graph paper, line by line, in his own slower hand, so that he would have it in front of him when he sat down to make the part. Halfway through the sketch, he stopped. He had drawn the angle of the cut from memory without looking at the original. He looked down at the letter to check. The angle on the page matched the angle he had drawn. They were identical. He set the pencil down very carefully on the felt, as though it were something that could break. And outside the window the snow had begun again, slow and quiet, settling on the cobblestones beyond the glass. The bell rang twice. Adam looked up. 4 days. He had counted them without meaning to, the way you counted the days of a fever. The shop was warm. The wall of clocks ticked on at their slightly uneven pace. He pushed the loop up onto his forehead and stood. The watch lay open on the bench behind him, its components laid out across a strip of black velvet he had pinned to a board for the purpose. He had not put them away in 4 days. He had not closed the case back once. Inda came in first. The emerald velvet under a long wool coat, the gloves already in her hand. Behind her, Neen, the navy skirt, the satchel, the careful steps of a child told to mind her boots on the threshold. Shar was not with them. Adam noticed and did not ask. "Mr. Quill," Inda said by way of greeting. "Adam?" She let the corrections stand. Snow on the shoulders of her coat. She unbuttoned it slowly and folded it across one arm. Neen stood a half step behind her, hands clasped in front of her satchel, looking around the front room the way she had looked at the loop 4 days ago, quietly, deciding what to remember. Adam said he had been working on the watch. He said he could show them if they wanted. He had not meant to offer. The words came out before he had decided. Inda inclined her head a fraction and gestured for Neen to follow, and the three of them passed through the curtain into the back room. The bench under the yellow lamp, the black velvet board, the watch in pieces. He had laid them out in the order of disassembly, the way his father had taught him as a boy. Case at the top left, then movement plate, then the bridge, then the wheels in descending size. Fourth wheel, third wheel, center wheel, escape wheel with its 13 teeth catching the lamplight. Below those, the pallet fork on a square of softer felt because its tips were easily bent. The mainspring barrel sat on the right, open, the balance wheel, blued, in its own small porcelain dish. Inda stopped at the edge of the bench. She did not reach, she looked. She had not, he realized, been told that the watch would be in pieces, only that it would be worked on. She let out a breath that was not quite a breath, and stood with her gloves folded across her wrist, and her gaze moving from one piece of the watch to the next, like a person reading a sentence she did not want to read too quickly. Neen stood at her sister's elbow, too short to see the bench properly. She rose onto the toes of her Mary Janes, fell back, rose again. The leather of the shoes creaked at the second rise. Adam pulled the stool out from under the bench and pushed it toward the child. He said she could stand on it if she wanted. He kept his eyes on the velvet board when he said it, because he did not want to make a thing of it. Neen looked at her sister. Inda nodded once, the smallest movement of the chin. The child stepped up. She put one hand on the edge of the bench to steady herself, fingers flat, very careful not to lean on anything that lay on its surface. The other hand stayed at her side. She did not touch. Adam spoke as he worked, but he was talking to himself more than to them, the way his father had talked to himself when there had been a boy on a stool at his elbow many years ago. He named the parts as he tipped them, one by one, under the lamp. Center wheel, third wheel, fourth. The escape wheel he picked up with the brass tweezers and held in the pool of yellow light, and he said the number of teeth aloud, 13, and Neen breathed in through her nose and held it. He set the escape wheel down. He picked up the loop from the chain at his neck and offered it across the bench to her, the chain still around his own neck, the loop held out on the flat of his palm. She looked at it, then at her sister, then at him. She took it the way a child takes a bird, both hands cupped beneath. He showed her how to hold it to her eye, close, with the lashes nearly brushing the glass, and where to point it. He pushed the porcelain dish with the balance wheel 2 inches closer to her. The loop was too large for her face. She managed it. She bent over the dish with her hair falling forward in its soft waves, the small braided strand on one side swinging against her cheek, and she did not breathe out for a long moment. When she did, she lifted her head and looked at Adam over the top of the loop, and her eyes were very wide. "It's blue," she said. "It's tempered, heated until it turns that color, then cooled. It makes the steel softer in a useful way." "My grandmother's." "Your grandmother's." She looked again. Adam watched her sister. Inda had not moved. She stood with her gloves across her wrist, and she was watching the child at the bench, and her face was the face she had brought into the shop the first time, composed and quiet, but something at the corner of her mouth had gone, not softened, released. The held set of it had let go a fraction. She looked at her sister with the loop and the blued steel, and she looked at Adam, and she did not say anything. He let her watch. He went back to the bench. He picked up the palette fork, held it under the lamp, and explained what it did, mostly for the child, partly to fill the silence so that Inda would not have to say anything if she did not want to. He spoke quietly. He did not perform. He was conscious, in a way that was new to him, of the apron and the loop, and the cluttered bench, and of the photograph above his head. And he was conscious that none of these things made him a master, but that today, for the first time, none of them made him an apprentice either. He was a person at a workbench, with another person's watch in front of him, and a child on a stool at his elbow. And the work was what was happening. After perhaps 10 minutes, he showed Neen how to set the loop back down on its small cushion. She put it back with both hands. She stepped down from the stool. She wiped her palms once against the pleats of her navy skirt, and then folded them in front of her satchel again, the way she had stood when they had come in. He turned to Inda. He told her, briefly and without making it sound like an offer, where he was in the work. That the disassembly was finished, that the diagnosis was clearer than it had been 4 days ago, that he had found his father's old records and that they were going to help. He did not say more than that. He did not want to promise. She listened. She nodded once at the end. She drew on her gloves, one finger at a time, the way she had drawn them on the first time. She turned toward the curtain. Neen turned with her. At the doorway between the back room and the front, Inda paused. She did not look back at the bench. She looked, instead, at the photograph on the wall above it. And Adam realized she had seen it the first time, too, 4 days ago, and had not asked. She did not ask now, either. They left through the front. The bell rang twice. Adam stood for a moment by the bench, looking at the velvet board. The escape wheel had moved, 1/2 millimeter to the right of where he had laid it out. The child had not touched it. The brass tweezers lay where he had set them down. He stared at the wheel. Then he heard, from the front of the shop, the sound of the doorbell ringing a third time, 2 minutes after they had gone, and a man's voice in the front room calling his name. He went through the curtain. The man at the counter was someone Adam knew, older than his father would have been. Gray wool overcoat dusted with snow at the shoulders, a pocket watch on a chain across the front of his waistcoat. Mr. Holbrook, who had run a watchmaker's shop 2 streets over for 41 years, and who had been one of his father's oldest friends in the trade. He came by perhaps 4 times a year, always without warning, always to talk about nothing in particular for a quarter of an hour, and then leave. Adam was glad to see him, and also, in a small private way he did not show, not glad. He could still feel the weight of the loop being passed to a child. He could still see the 1/2 millimeter shift of an escape wheel he had not touched. He wanted to be back at the bench. Holbrook looked at him a long moment before he spoke. He had a habit of doing that. He said only that he had been passing. He said the snow was going to turn to ice by morning. He said he had heard, from somewhere he did not name, that Adam had taken in a difficult piece. Adam did not ask how he had heard. The trade was small. He said he was looking at it. Holbrook nodded, said nothing more about it. Asked after the mantel clock from the woman the day before. Adam answered. Holbrook stood at the counter with his gloved hands resting on the wood, looked once at the wall of clocks, and said the moon dial on the walnut case was running fast by about a minute a week. Adam said he knew. Holbrook nodded again and turned to leave. At the door he paused. He said, without looking back, that his father had been the best watchmaker he had ever known, and that the best watchmakers were the ones who knew when to say they were not sure. Then he went out into the snow. The bell rang twice. Adam stood for a moment at the counter. He locked the door behind Holbrook. He turned the sign. He went back to the bench. He worked the rest of the afternoon. He drew up a list of the components he still needed to clean, the bushings that wanted refitting, the pivots that wanted polishing. He cleaned 3 of the wheels in a small dish of solvent and laid them on a strip of lint-free cloth to dry. He did not touch the escape wheel. At 7 he made himself eat. He brought down bread and a piece of yellow cheese and ate at the bench, slowly, because he could not bear to sit at the table upstairs. The bread was a day old. He did not mind. He cut the cheese into thin slices with the small kitchen knife he kept in a drawer beside the brass weights. The next morning, Inda came back alone. She came in on the stroke of opening, 10 o'clock, with the snow still falling outside. No coat over her arm this time. She had left it on. She walked to the counter and stood with her gloves folded across her wrist. She did not pretend she was there for any other reason. Adam came out from the back room with his apron on and the loop at his neck. He had been expecting her, in the back of his mind, since the moment the bell had rung. He had not been expecting her so soon. He said good morning. She inclined her head. He told her then, because he had decided overnight that he would tell her at the first opportunity, that there was a problem he had not yet named. He spoke quietly. He did not look away. He said that one of the components inside the watch, a small lever, a piece no longer than his thumbnail, was cracked. He said he could not source a replacement. The workshop that had made the watch had closed in 1904. There were no parts for it. There had not been parts for it for over 120 years. She did not move. She watched him. He said he was going to need to make the part himself. He said his father had made one once, 30 years ago, for a different client, and that he had found his father's records, and that he had a sketch with the proportions noted in millimeters and the angle of the cut marked with a small arrow. He said the work would take time. He said he could not say exactly how much time. He said he was not certain he could do it correctly. He had practiced the sentences without meaning to. They came out level. Once they were out, he felt unsteady. She said nothing for what felt like a long time. The clocks ticked. The bell on the door did not ring. No one came in. Outside the window, the snow went on falling, and a tram passed at the end of the street, and Adam could hear, through the wall, the sound of the bakery on the corner pulling its morning bread out of the oven, the soft thud of the trays on the steel rack. Inda looked at him in a way that was not the look she had given him the first day. The composure was there. The composure had not gone anywhere. But something behind it was attending. She was, he understood, deciding something. She spoke at last. Her voice was even, low. She said her father had told her something once. She said it the way a person quotes a line they have carried with them for a long time and have not had occasion to say aloud. She said her father had said that the only people he trusted were the ones who told him what they were not sure of. She did not look away from him while she said it. When she had finished, she let the words sit between them, and then she nodded once and drew on her gloves, one finger at a time, the way she always did. He did not say thank you. He understood, somewhere in the place where understanding came when you were too tired to argue, that thank you would have been the wrong word. He nodded back the way she had nodded at him. She turned toward the door. Halfway there, she stopped. She did not turn around. She said, with her back to him, that she would not come again until he sent for her. She said it the way a person makes a small gift they do not want acknowledged. Then she opened the door, and the bell rang twice, and the cold came in off the street for a moment, and she was gone. Adam stood at the counter. The wood was warm under his palms from where he had been leaning on it. He looked at the velvet box which he had left on the counter the first day, and which had sat there ever since, empty, a small dark square he had not had the heart to put away. He picked it up. He carried it through the curtain. He set it on the corner of the bench beside the photograph of his father in its small wooden frame, and he stood for a moment with his hand resting on the lid. Then he sat down on the stool and pulled the lamp closer and pushed the loupe down over his eye. There was a sketch on graph paper at his elbow, in his own slower hand, with proportions in millimeters and an angle marked by a small arrow. There was a brown reference book open at page 217 with 3 penciled words in the margin in a hand he had known all his life. There was a piece of brass stock in a drawer 2 feet to his left, the right grade, the right thickness, that he had not yet opened. He sat for a long time with his hands flat on the felt. Then he reached for the drawer. Have you ever had someone trust you with something you were not sure you could carry? A piece of work, a child, a confidence, and felt the weight of it settle inside your chest and decided, anyway, to begin? If something in this story has reached you, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Adam still has a long winter ahead of him, and so do they. That night, at 2:20 in the morning, the lamp on his bench was still on, and he had not yet slept. 2 weeks. Adam measured them in coffee cups. In the steady wear of a particular file against a particular piece of brass, in the way the light from the dormer window in the attic changed color from pale gray at 8 in the morning to flat white at noon to thin yellow by 4. He did not measure them in days. The days ran together. He slept 3 hours, sometimes 4. He set the wind-up alarm clock for 5:30 most mornings, and most mornings he was already awake when it rang. He came down the spiral stair in his shirt and trousers, put the kettle on the small gas ring at the corner of the bench, drank the first cup of the day standing, and sat down on the stool with the loop already in his hand. The brass stock came out of the drawer on the first morning. It was a small rectangle, no larger than a postage stamp, of the right grade and a thickness within 1/10 of a millimeter of what he needed. He had not bought it for this. His father had stocked it years ago. The label on the underside of the drawer was in his father's hand. Adam had only to read it once to know what was in there. He cut the rough shape on the small benchtop mill the first afternoon. He did not use the lathe for the final pass. The brown book's margin had told him not to, and his father's letter had told him not to, and now he was not going to tell himself anything different. The rest was filing, by hand, with a set of jeweler's files no thicker at the tip than the lead of a pencil. He filed for 2 hours and laid the piece on the velvet and looked at it. He filed for another 2 hours and laid it down again. The third day he ruined the first attempt, a slip of the file across the long edge, 1/2 a millimeter off, no use to anyone. He sat with the spoiled piece between his fingers for 1/4 of an hour and did not feel as much as he would have expected to feel. Then he put it in the small porcelain dish where he kept the parts that had failed and would never again be parts, and he opened the drawer and took out a second piece of brass stock, and he started over. The second attempt was better. Not finished, better. He worked through the days like a person walking down a long corridor. Customers came in. He answered them. He fixed a wristwatch for a teacher from the school on the hill. He told a man with a French carriage clock that he could do the work in 3 weeks, no sooner. He apologized to the woman with the mantel clock that chimed at the 1/4 past. He had not got to it yet. She said she would wait. He took the ledger down and wrote her name in it again, the second time in 2 weeks, and saw, on the page before, his father's handwriting from 4 years ago, when she had brought the same clock in for a different fault. He had not noticed it the first time he had written her name. He noticed it now. In the evenings he turned the sign at 6 and worked until midnight or 1, and on the worst evenings until 2 or 3. He stopped only when his hands began to shake from tiredness, because hands that shook from tiredness made parts that were 1/4 of a millimeter wrong, and 1/4 of a millimeter wrong was a part you could not use. On those nights he would push back from the bench, sit for 10 minutes with his palms flat on the felt, climb the spiral stair, and lie down on the bed without taking off his shirt. He stopped shaving regularly. He did not stop entirely. He shaved on the days he opened the shop, but the stubble came in by evening and stayed by morning. On the 7th evening, somewhere near 8 o'clock, the bell rang twice. He came through the curtain with the loop still down over one eye, because he had not been expecting anyone. Shar was at the counter. She was alone. The dramatic black silk had been replaced by a dark wool coat and a soft red scarf wound twice around her throat. The portfolio was not under her arm tonight. In her hands she held a paper cup of coffee with a card sleeve around it, and she set it down on the counter and pushed it across the wood toward him with 2 fingers, the way a person pushes a chess piece they have already decided to move. Adam pushed the loop up onto his forehead. He had not expected her to bring him anything. He was not sure she had expected to either. There was a small reservedness in the way she stood at the counter that he had not seen the first time she had come in, when she had been all hands and clocks and the wall of clocks for inspiration. She did not come past the counter. She did not ask to see the work. She did not, he realized, want to know how far along he was, because that was not what she had come for. She said only that Inda would not take this watch to anyone else now. She said it the way a person says a thing they want said and do not want to elaborate on. She said it was important he knew. Then she said good night, and the bell rang twice, and she was gone before he had finished drawing a breath to answer her with. He stood at the counter with the coffee in his hand. The cup was hot through the card sleeve. He carried it through the curtain to the bench. He set it down at the corner of the felt where the cold cup of tea had sat 2 weeks ago. He sat down. He did not drink it for a long minute. He looked at the small brass part lying on the velvet under the lamp. The second attempt, 3 days into its filing, not yet finished, not yet wrong. He looked at it the way a person looks at a thing they have been with for so long that they no longer see it. Then he looked away. He looked at the photograph on the wall above the bench. The frame had a thin film of dust along its top edge. He had not wiped it in some weeks. The face inside the frame had not changed. He took a swallow of the coffee. It was strong and a little too sweet for his taste. He wondered, briefly, whether Shar had guessed or whether that was how she drank it herself. He went back to the file. By the 11th day, the second attempt was nearly finished. By the 13th day, it was finished. He held it up under the lamp on the morning of the 14th day, between the tips of the brass tweezers, and he turned it slowly, and he looked at every edge. It was not perfect. He could see under the loupe 3 places where the file had gone a fraction past where he had meant it to go, and where he had then had to come back and even the line on the other side. The result was a piece that was almost what his father's sketch had shown, and almost was, he understood now in a way he had not understood before, what watchmaking was. There was no perfect part inside any old watch. There was only the part that did what it had to do. He laid it back down on the velvet. He sat for a moment with his elbows on the bench and his face in his hands. When he opened his eyes again, the small porcelain dish to his right held the failed first attempt, and the velvet held the finished second attempt, and the bench held everything else. And outside the window of the front room the snow had stopped, and the cobblestones beyond the glass were dark with the wet. He stood up. His back ached in the place between his shoulder blades. He walked, slowly, to the front of the shop. He turned the sign on the door from closed to open, because it was 9 in the morning of the 15th day, and he had not realized it. When he turned back toward the curtain, he saw, through the window of the front room, the figure of a man standing on the pavement opposite, looking at the shop. He did not recognize the face. The man stood for perhaps another 5 seconds, and then walked on, and Adam stood at the counter and watched him go. And the bell on the door did not ring, and he did not know why he was suddenly cold. The man did not come back. Adam stood at the counter for another minute and watched the empty pavement opposite, and then he turned away from the window and went through the curtain to the bench. The cold passed off him by the time he sat down. The part lay on the velvet where he had left it. He picked up the loupe. He looked at it again. 5 minutes. He turned it under the lamp between the tips of the tweezers. He looked at each edge. He looked at the angle of the cut his father's sketch had marked with the small arrow. He laid the part flat. He laid the sketch beside it. He looked at one and then at the other. It was close enough. He set the tweezers down on the felt. He took off the loupe and let it drop to his chest on its chain. He looked up at the photograph on the wall above the bench. His father was wearing this apron. The leather had been newer in the photograph than it was now. The buckle at the back had not yet been worn shiny at one edge from where the strap rubbed against the back of the stool. His father was standing at this same bench, with one hand resting on the bench top and the other holding a small clock movement up to the light from the dormer window. And he was not smiling exactly. He had not been a man who smiled in photographs. But his face had the small, private satisfaction of a man caught in the middle of doing a thing he was good at. Adam looked at his father's face for a long time. Then he said, out loud, into the warm yellow of the lamp, that he thought his father would say it was close enough. He did not feel foolish saying it. He had felt foolish 2 weeks ago, reading the letter aloud in the cold of the attic. He did not feel foolish now. The room received the sentence, and the sentence sat where he had put it. He turned back to the bench. The reassembly had a shape and an order that his father had taught him as a boy, and that he had practiced on 1,000 simpler watches in the years since, and that he could have walked through in his sleep on a normal job. This was not a normal job. He laid out the parts again across the black velvet board in the order he would need them, and he sat for a minute with his palms flat on the felt to steady himself before he began. The mainspring barrel went in first. He set it in its place on the movement plate and seated it with the small, flat-tipped tool his father had ground down for the purpose at some point before Adam had been born. The handle of the tool was brass, smoothed in 2 places where his father's thumb had worn it down over 30 years. Adam's thumb now sat in those same 2 places. He had stopped noticing it a long time ago. He noticed it today. The center wheel, the 3rd wheel, the 4th, each into its jewel bearing, each pivot seated with a touch he could feel as much as see. The escape wheel with its 13 teeth, he laid it in with the tweezers, set it true, watched it spin a quarter turn on its own under the friction of his breath. The new part, he picked it up between the tweezers. He held it for a moment under the lamp. He did not look at it again under the loupe. He had looked at it enough. He set it in. The palette fork went in over the new part. He breathed out very slowly as he set it. The 2 ends of the fork dropped into their slots on the escape wheel. He did not let go of the tweezers for another 5 seconds, in case the fork wanted to lift. It did not. The bridges, the screws, each no larger than a grain of rice, each from its own place in the small porcelain dish, each going back to the threaded hole it had come out of. He did them in the order he had taken them out, which was the order his father's diagram in the brown book had shown, and he tightened each by feel and not by force. The balance wheel last. He set it in its place under the balance bridge. The blued steel caught the lamplight the way it had caught it the day he had first taken the watch out of its velvet box. He fitted the bridge over it. He set the screw. He let go. The balance wheel did not move. He did not expect it to. He had not wound the mainspring. He sat back on the stool. His hands, when he laid them on the felt, were steady. He looked at them. He turned them over. The callus on the side of his right index finger from the file, the small white scar at the base of his left thumb from a slip of the lathe in his 2nd year of apprenticeship, the faint stain of ink on the inside of the middle finger of his right hand from writing in the ledger. His father's hands had looked like this. His grandfather's hands, in the only photograph he had ever seen of them, had looked like this. He had not noticed before now that his hands had become hands that worked. He stood up. He stretched the small of his back. He went through the curtain to the front of the shop and looked at the wall clocks. They were all ticking, each at its slightly different pace, the same way they had been ticking when he had been 6 years old and had sat on the floor by the wall and tried to count which one was fastest. He had never been able to. He used to think it was a thing he would learn when he was older. He had not learned it. He understood now that there had been nothing to learn. He went back to the bench. He picked up the watch. He did not put it on the strap yet. The strap was in a small leather bag in the drawer where he had put it the first night. He held the case in the palm of his hand, the new case-back screws still in the porcelain dish where they would wait until the watch was tested. He turned the crown between his thumb and forefinger. 1/2 turn. 2. He stopped. He had not yet decided whether to wind it now or to leave it for tomorrow. He looked again at the photograph above the bench, and at the small, empty velvet box on the corner of the felt, and at the brown book lying open at page 217, with the 3 penciled words in the margin, and at the strip of black velvet on its board, with the empty places where the parts had lain for 2 weeks. He laid the watch down. He decided to leave the winding for the morning. He had been awake since 5. His hands were steady now, but they would not be steady in an hour, and a watch that had waited 120 years for its first new part could wait 1 more night. He covered the bench with the small cloth he used to cover the bench overnight. He did not move the watch from where it lay. He turned the lamp down to its lowest setting. He stood for a moment with his hand on the back of the stool. The bell at the front of the shop rang twice. Adam did not move at first. He had locked the door at 7. It was past 9 now. The sign read, "Closed." He had heard the bell ring twice. He went through the curtains slowly, wiping his hands on the apron without thinking. The front room was empty. The door was closed. The sign read "Closed." The bolt was thrown, and there was no one inside the shop and no one on the pavement outside. He walked to the door. He looked left. He looked right. The street was empty. The cobblestones were dark with the wet. He stood at the door for another minute, and then he locked the bolt again, although it had not been unlocked, and he went back through the curtain to the bench, and the watch lay where he had left it under the small cloth, and the lamp burned low, and he did not understand what he had heard. 057. He slept badly. Adam woke at 5 and lay in the dark for 10 minutes before he got up. The bell. He had heard it. He had walked to the door, and the door had been bolted, and the street had been empty. He had checked the bell itself before he went upstairs, the small brass bell on its spring above the inside of the door, the one his father had hung in the year before Adam was born. It had not been touched. There was no draft in the front room strong enough to move it. He stopped thinking about it by the second cup of tea. There were other things in the day that wanted his attention more. He came down at 6. He took the cloth off the bench. The watch was where he had left it, the case still open, the new part seated in its place under the pallet fork, the balance wheel under its bridge. He sat down on the stool. He turned the lamp up. He took the crown between his thumb and forefinger. Half a turn. Pause. Half a turn. Pause. The mainspring tightened in its barrel. He could feel it, the small, increasing resistance through the crown, the way a fishing line feels when something has taken the hook at the far end. 3 half-turns. 4. He went slowly. The instructions in the brown book had been firm about this for the older mechanisms. You did not pull on a mainspring that had not been wound in a century. You eased it. He stopped at 6 half-turns. The watch did not start. He held it in the lamplight and waited. 10 seconds. 20. The balance wheel did not move. He gave the crown one more half-turn. He felt the resistance change at the end of it, a small catch, a small hesitation, the kind of feedback in the crown that meant the mainspring was not running smooth in its barrel. He felt it the way a man feels a stair tread that has gone soft underfoot. He stopped. He laid the watch on the velvet. He took the loop down over his eye. He did not curse. He had wanted to. He had been told by his father, as a boy, that you did not curse over a watch because a watch did not deserve it. And Adam had carried that the way he had carried other small things, without thinking about it. He breathed out instead, slowly, through his teeth. The mainspring catches at the 7th turn. That meant the new part. The new part was the only thing in the movement that was new. He did not need to take the watch apart to know it. He took it apart anyway, because there was no other way to fix it. He worked through the disassembly in the order he had assembled, in reverse. The balance bridge, the balance wheel, the pallet bridge, the pallet fork. He set each piece back onto the velvet board in its place. The new part came out between the tweezers, and he laid it under the lamp, and he looked at it. He did not see anything wrong by eye. He did not see anything wrong under the loop. He took the part to the small measuring stand at the back corner of the bench, the one his father had built out of a piece of mahogany and a brass micrometer sometime in the 1980s. And he measured the piece across its length. The number on the dial was the number he had been aiming for. He measured it across its width. The number was the number he had been aiming for. He measured it across the angle of the cut. The angle was off, by less than half a degree. He had seen it on the bench yesterday and judged it close enough, and yesterday, close enough had felt true. This morning, with the mainspring catching at the 7th turn, close enough was no longer the right answer. He set the part down on the velvet. He sat on the stool with his palms flat on the felt, and he looked at the photograph on the wall. He thought, for the first time, that he was not going to be able to do this. He thought it the way you think a thing in the back of your mind that you have been keeping at the back of your mind for 2 weeks. He let the thought sit. He did not chase it away. After about a minute it went on its own, and what was left in its place was the part on the velvet and the watch in pieces, and the angle that was off by less than half a degree. Less than half a degree. He took the smallest of the jeweler's files from the rack. He took the part between the tips of the tweezers and laid it against the small brass jig his father had made for holding pieces of this size, and he set the file at the angle, and he made one pass. He measured. He made one pass. He measured. After 4 passes he had taken off the half a degree. He had also, he saw, taken off 0.2 of a millimeter from the long edge that he had not meant to take off. He laid the file down. He looked at the part. 0.2 of a millimeter. He thought about it. He picked the part up again. He held it under the loop. The long edge had been a hair too long the day before, he remembered now. He had thought, working on it, that he would let it be, because the Brown Book's diagram had suggested a tolerance there. The 0.2 of a millimeter had brought it into the tolerance. It was, by accident, what he had wanted. He sat for a moment with the part in his palm. Then he laughed, once, quietly, a small, dry breath that came out before he had decided to let it. The room received it without remark. He reassembled the mainspring barrel, the wheels, the new part, the pallet fork over it, the bridges, the screws, the balance wheel under its bridge. He did it more quickly this time because his hands had done it once and they remembered. He did not rush. He did not skip the steady 10-second breath he took before setting the balance bridge. The balance wheel went in. He set the screw. He let go. He took the crown between his thumb and forefinger. Half a turn. Pause. Half a turn. He went slowly. At the 7th half turn, he felt the small catch from before. He stopped his hand. He held it. The catch was lighter this time. It eased. The crown turned past it. He kept winding. 8, 9, 10. He stopped at 15, which the book had said was the working tension for this size of mainspring on this size of movement. He took his fingers off the crown. The balance wheel did not move for a long second. Then it did. A small twitch. A pause. Another twitch. Then it began to swing. It swung once. Twice. It found its rhythm at the 3rd swing, and it kept swinging, and underneath it the tiny pivot of the escape wheel turned a tooth, and the watch made the first small sound a watch makes when it begins to run, after it has not run, and the sound was a tick. The tick repeated, then again, then again. The wall of clocks in the front room ticked on at their slightly uneven pace, and inside the back room the new tick joined them, and Adam sat on the stool and did not move. He listened. He listened for 30 seconds, a minute, 2 minutes. The watch did not stop. The tick was steady. The balance wheel swung at the rate it had been built to swing at 120 years ago, in a workshop 4 valleys north of anywhere that knew the workshop existed anymore. He stood up. He walked very slowly 3 steps to the wall of the back room. He sat down on the floor with his back against the wall, his legs out in front of him, his hands in his lap. He looked up at the ceiling. The ceiling had a small water stain in one corner in the shape of a country he had never been to. He had noticed it as a boy. He had not looked at it in a long time. He looked at it now. He did not get up for 10 minutes. The watch went on, ticking on the bench. He listened to it and the wall of clocks beyond the curtain, and his hands, when at last he looked down at them, were steady, and his face, when he reached up to touch it, was wet. He stood up. He went to the bench. He picked up the watch. It was still ticking. He looked at it for a moment longer, and then he set it down on the velvet, very carefully, and he reached for the telephone on the corner of the bench. The card was on the counter. Adam picked it up from beside the till, where it had sat since the first afternoon. The handwriting was Inda's, the small, even letters, the address without ornament, the absence of a telephone number. He had not noticed at the time. He noticed now. There was no number to call. He stood for a moment with the card in his hand. Then he set it back down. He took his coat from the hook by the door, locked the front of the shop, and walked. The address was further than he had expected. 20 minutes through the old quarter, then across the canal bridge, then another 10 minutes along a quieter street where the buildings were taller and set further back from the curb. The snow had been swept here into low banks against the railings. He did not pass many people. He had the watch in the inside pocket of his coat, wrapped in a square of soft chamois cloth and seated in its velvet box. He could feel the small square of it against his ribs every time he breathed in. The house was narrow and dark, a brass nameplate by the door, polished. He pressed the bell. A man in a dark coat opened. Adam said his name and said he had come from Miss Inda. The man looked at him for a long second and then nodded and stepped back. He was asked to wait in a small paneled room off the hall. He did not sit down. He stood in the middle of the carpet with his hands in his pockets and the coat still on, and he listened to a clock somewhere in the house, ticking at a different pace from the wall of clocks in his shop, and he thought, irrelevantly, that it was running about a second a day fast. She came in alone. She wore a soft gray wool dress today, not the emerald velvet. The mother-of-pearl pins were the same. The composure was the same. She stopped 2 steps inside the door and looked at him. He took the velvet box out of his coat. He did not open it. He said only that he had come because she did not have a telephone, and that he had wanted to tell her in person. He did not say what. She understood at once. She did not move. She did not speak. She crossed the carpet to him in 3 quiet steps, and then she stopped, and she held out her hand, and he placed the velvet box into it. She did not open it there. She turned and went out of the room without a word, and a moment later he heard her calling, somewhere upstairs, for Neen and for Shar. They came to the shop the same afternoon. The bell rang twice at 3:30. Inda first, then Shar behind her, then Neen, all 3 of them in their winter coats. The snow had started again. Their shoulders carried it in. Adam led them through the curtain to the bench. He had laid out a clean strip of cream felt across the surface, and the watch sat in the center of it on its strap, which he had cleaned and conditioned that morning. The yellow lamp burned over it. The wall of clocks beyond the curtain ticked at their slightly uneven pace. Inda stopped at the edge of the bench. She did not look at Adam. She did not look at her sister or at Shar. She looked at the watch. She let 2 full seconds pass before she reached for it. He saw her hand pause once, halfway, and then go on. She picked up the watch by the strap. She turned it over once. The new caseback caught the light. She held it to her ear. She closed her eyes. She stood like that for a long moment. The tick of the watch was small at that distance. He could only just hear it himself from where he sat, 3 feet away on the stool. He watched her face. He had not realized until now that he had spent the last 2 weeks imagining this moment. He had imagined it badly. The real version was much quieter. When she opened her eyes again, she did not put the watch down. She held it in the palm of one hand and laid the fingers of the other across the case. And she looked at Adam, and he could see her gathering the breath she would need to speak. He asked her, before she could, whose it had been. He asked because he had wanted to ask her since the first afternoon and had never had the right opening, and because he understood, now, that the watch on the cream felt was not an object he had repaired, but a person he had not met. He asked quietly. He did not make a thing of it. She said it had been her grandmother's. She said her grandmother had given it to her before she died. She said the year. The year was 9 years ago. She said the name. Then she said, more quietly, that she had not been able to wind it since the year after that. She had carried it to 3 watchmakers. Each had refused. She had stopped carrying it after the 3rd. She said, "Thank you." The 2 words came out level. Then, the next breath, her composure did not come with her. He watched it happen. The small set of her mouth that had been there since the first afternoon, the held line of her shoulders, the way she had drawn her gloves on 1 finger at a time. She did not cry. She did not break. She only let go, by a fraction, of the thing she had been holding, and the holding had been so long and so steady that the letting go was visible across her whole body, the way a change in weather is visible across a field. Shar was standing behind her. Adam saw her hand come up and rest, very lightly, on the back of Inda's elbow. Inda did not turn. Neen stood at her other side with both hands on the strap of her satchel and her eyes very wide. And she was not looking at the watch anymore. She was looking at her sister. And Adam realized then what he had not realized in any of the 3 meetings before this one. He realized that the eldest of the 3 was the one who had not been allowed to be the youngest of the 3 for a long time, and that everyone else in the room had known it, and that he had not. He looked away. He did not want to be in the moment when she let go further. He gave her the moment by not looking. He stood up from the stool. He went through the curtain to the front of the shop. He found a small square of soft cloth in a drawer, and he came back with it, and he held it out without speaking, the way you hold a thing out to a person who may need it and may not. Inda took the cloth. She did not use it for her eyes. She used it to wipe a smudge of fingerprint off the case of the watch, very carefully, the way she had drawn her gloves on each time he had seen her, 1 finger at a time. The motion was a small, dignified return to herself. He understood the motion. He let it be. She set the watch down on the cream felt. She drew a breath. She said in a voice that was almost the voice from the first afternoon, and not quite, that she would like to settle the bill. He said it could wait. She said it could not. She was not unkind about it. He nodded. He went to the front room to write the receipt. Behind him, in the back room, he heard Neen ask her sister something very quietly in a tone he could not catch, and he heard Inda answer her with 1 word, also quiet, and the word might have been yes, and he did not turn around to look. The clocks ticked on. When he came back through the curtain with the pen in his hand and the receipt book under his arm, all 3 of them were standing close together at the bench, and Inda had the watch on her wrist, and the strap was the right length, and the small gold catch sat where it should, and outside the window the snow had begun to come down more steadily, and somewhere in the house a clock he did not own and could not see struck the 4:15. He wrote the receipt slowly. Adam sat down at the small writing desk in the front room and opened the receipt book to a fresh page. He filled in the date. He filled in the name. He filled in the description of the work, 3 lines, the way his father had taught him, no more than necessary. He filled in the amount. Then he paused. He looked at the back room through the gap in the curtain. He could see the 3 of them at the bench, Inda turning her wrist under the lamp, Shar leaning in to look, Neen on her toes again to see. He looked at the receipt in front of him. He uncapped the pen. He wrote in small letters along the bottom of the slip that if the watch stopped, she should bring it back. No charge. He underlined the last 2 words once. He capped the pen. He tore the slip from the book. He came back through the curtain. Inda was waiting at the bench with her purse already open. He handed her the slip. She took it. She read it. She did not speak. She folded the slip once. She did not put it into her purse where he could see the small bound stack of other receipts behind a leather flap. She slid it instead into the inside pocket of her jacket, the one against her ribs, and she pressed the flap of the pocket closed with the flat of her thumb. She paid. The notes were crisp. He took them and put them in the till in the front room and made out the change without counting it twice. When he came back, she had drawn on her gloves, 1 finger at a time, the way she always did. She inclined her head at him. She did not say thank you a second time. She had said it already, and they both knew where it sat. Shar came forward. She had a small reservedness on her face, the kind she had brought with her the evening of the coffee. She did not say anything either. She held out her hand. Adam took it. Her grip was firm, firmer than he had expected, almost a man's grip, and held a full second longer than the polite minimum. He understood it as the thing it was. He returned the pressure. She let go. Neen had not moved from the bench. She was standing by the cream felt where the watch had lain, with her satchel against her hip and one hand inside it. He had not noticed her open it. She drew out from the satchel a small folded piece of paper, white paper folded twice, the kind from a school exercise book. She held it out to him with both hands. She did not say what it was. Her sister did not ask. Inda watched the exchange with the small, unreadable composure that was hers, and Shar watched too. And Adam took the folded paper and slipped it into the breast pocket of the apron without opening it. The child seemed pleased that he had not opened it in front of her. She stepped back to her sister's side, and she folded her hands in front of her satchel again, the way she had stood the first afternoon, 4 weeks ago to the day. They went to the door. Adam came with them. He held the door open. The bell rang twice as it swung. Snow on the pavement, fresh, light. Inda paused on the threshold. She looked at him. She did not say anything. She nodded, once, the same small nod she had been giving him since the first afternoon. But it sat differently now, and he understood why, and he nodded back. They went out into the snow, the 3 of them. Inda first, then Shar, then Neen, in the order they had come in. Adam stood at the open door and watched them go. He did not close the door at once. He stood and watched. They walked together at an even pace down the cobblestoned street, 3 figures in winter coats against the pale light of the afternoon. Inda did not look back. Shar did not look back. At the corner of the next building, just before they turned and were lost from sight, the smallest of them, the one in the navy coat, turned her head and looked back at the shop. She did not wave. She only looked, the same way she had looked at the loop and at the blued steel and at the wall of clocks. Deciding what to remember. Then she turned again, and the 3 of them went round the corner and the street was empty. Adam closed the door. The bell rang twice. He stood for a moment in the front room. The wall of clocks ticked at their slightly uneven pace. He turned the sign, after a moment, from open to closed. It was not yet 4 in the afternoon. He had not closed the shop in the afternoon for 2 years. He went through the curtain. He sat down on the stool. He took the folded paper out of the breast pocket of the apron. He unfolded it. It was a drawing. Pencil on white paper, careful, the strokes patient and small. A drawing of the watch, the case open, the movement exposed, the components laid out the way he had laid them out across the black velvet board on the second afternoon. The escape wheel with its 13 teeth, each tooth drawn. The pallet fork, the balance wheel, the mainspring barrel, the new part in its place with a tiny arrow drawn beside it. Each piece was labeled in careful pencil: escape wheel, pallet fork, mainspring, balance, in the round handwriting of a 13-year-old who had been told her whole life to take her time. At the bottom of the drawing, in the same hand, she had written, "Thank you for letting me see how it works." Adam sat with the drawing on his knee. He looked at it for a long time. The lamp burned on the bench. The watch was gone from the felt. The cream cloth was empty. The black velvet board with the tools and the small porcelain dish sat where it had sat for 4 weeks. He could put the board away now. He could close the brown book on page 217 and put it back on the shelf above the bench. He did not do those things yet. He stood up. He went to the wall above the bench where his father's photograph sat in its small wooden frame. He looked at the frame. He looked at the wall beside it. He took a small brass pin from the drawer where he kept the brass pins, and he held the drawing flat against the wall, just to the right of the photograph, and he pinned it in place at the top by one corner. The drawing was the same size as the photograph. He had not arranged for that. It was the size of the paper from a school exercise book, and it was the size of the photograph his father had been put into, and they sat together on the wall above the bench as though they had always sat there. Adam stepped back. He looked at the wall for a long time. Then he went through the curtain to the front of the shop. He walked to the window. He stood with his hands in the pockets of his trousers and the apron still on, and he looked out at the snow. The street was empty. The cobblestones were dark under the fresh fall. The street lamp at the corner had come on early in the gray of the afternoon. He could see the lights of the bakery opposite and the small tobacconists, and the long, quiet line of windows down the row of buildings on the other side. He stood at his own window in his own shop, and he watched the empty street. Somewhere behind him, deep in the back room, on the wall above the bench, his father's photograph and a child's drawing of a watch sat one beside the other. The yellow lamp was still on. He had not turned it down. Have you ever had a thing you were keeping for someone who was no longer there, and held it so still and so carefully for so long that you had stopped somewhere along the way, knowing how to set it down? And then one day, someone you did not expect handed you a small piece of paper, and you understood that the keeping was not the thing, the carrying on was the thing. If something here has reached you, leave a like and subscribe. There are more of these stories coming, slow and quiet, and I would like you to be here for the next one. Adam stood at the window for a while longer. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the wall of clocks ticked on at their slightly uneven pace. He did not move. He did not need to. There was nothing yet in the afternoon that wanted him. After some time, he turned away from the window and went back through the curtain to the bench, and he sat down on the stool, and he picked up a wristwatch from the small basket of work that had come in during the last 2 weeks and that he had not yet got to. And he slid the loop down over his eye, and he began.